Lois Lane. Injustice doesn't even get off the ground without one death, Lois Lane's. And the way it happens is one of the most twisted setups DC has ever put to page. Joker and Harley weren't out to just kill Superman's wife, they wanted to break the entire idea of Superman forever. Here's how they pulled it off. Using a mix of Scarecrow's fear toxin laced with kryptonite, Joker tricks Superman into seeing Doomsday instead of Lois. Clark, in full panic mode, does what he always does. He removes the threat. Only this time he carries Doomsday into orbit and realizes too late that it was Lois, in his arms, pregnant with his child, gone. And just when you think that's enough nightmare fuel, Joker adds another card to the deck. He wired a nuclear bomb to Lois's heartbeat. The moment it stopped, Metropolis stopped too. 1 million lives wiped in an instant. A city reduced to ash in the same moment Superman lost the person who grounded him. That combination, personal loss and public catastrophe, is the domino that knocks over everything else. The Justice League fractures. Superman stops believing in the system and starts ruling by fear. Batman, who always warned that unchecked power would end like this, suddenly finds himself standing against the man who used to be his closest ally, the Joker. If Lois Lane's death was the trigger, Joker's death was the detonation. You see, after Metropolis turned into a crater and Superman's entire world collapsed, there was only one person laughing. Literally. Joker sat in an interrogation room, smiling like he'd just won a championship. To him, this was his masterpiece, the day he proved even Superman could break. Batman tried to hold the line, grilling Joker for answers, but everyone could see it. Clark wasn't hearing words anymore. He was hearing every scream from Metropolis, every heartbeat that stopped when Lois's did, and with Joker cracking jokes about the unborn child Superman had just killed, the breaking point snapped. Superman didn't debate, didn't threaten, didn't ask. He grabbed Joker and in one iconic panel drove his fist straight through the clown's chest. No heat vision, no drawn-out fight, just a brutal final statement. It wasn't shocking that Joker died. Fans had seen Batman and Superman resist that urge for decades. The shock was that this time, Superman didn't stop himself. The world's ultimate Boy Scout crossed the one line everyone thought was unbreakable. The fallout was instant. Batman was horrified, not because Joker didn't deserve it, but because of what it meant. If Superman could execute someone in cold blood, then no villain, no rival, no dissenter was safe anymore. That punch didn't just kill Joker, it killed the idea of restraint. Nightwing. He wasn't just another hero on the board, he was the heart of the Bat family. Batman's first protege and the one who carried the mantle forward when Bruce couldn't. That's why his death shook Gotham to its core. It happened inside Arkham Asylum during a chaotic breakout. Batman, his allies, and the regime forces collided in a fight that spiraled out of control. In the middle of it, tensions between Dick and Damian Wayne, Bruce's son, reached their boiling point. The two had clashed for years over how to fight crime, with Damian's impatience constantly grinding against Dick's discipline. That frustration finally spilled over. Damian hurled his baton toward Dick, and the moment turned fatal. The strike itself wasn't lethal, but it threw Nightwing off balance. He stumbled, hit the ground, and his neck snapped against a rock. 1 second he was in the middle of the fight, the next he was gone. The aftermath was brutal in more ways than one. Damian tried to downplay the accident, claiming he hadn't meant to kill him, but the damage was done. Batman's grief was immeasurable. He'd already lost Metropolis, and now his oldest son in spirit was gone because of his youngest in blood. The rift between Bruce and Damian became permanent. Fans still argue about it to this day. Was it a tragic accident or proof of Damian's recklessness and arrogance? Whatever the answer, the panel of Nightwing's lifeless body became one of the defining images of injustice. Not because of spectacle, but because of how personal it felt. A family imploding in the middle of a war. Green Arrow. Green Arrow's death in Injustice stands out because it showed how far Superman had slipped from the hero the world once knew. This was a beating that ended with one of DC's most beloved street-level heroes lying dead in a regime cell. It happened when Batman and his small circle of allies were desperate for a way to level the playing field. Superman's powers made him untouchable, and they needed something that could bring him down. The answer was a special kryptonite pill, engineered to give normal humans temporary strength and durability on Superman's level. The plan was simple: secure the pill, keep it hidden, and make sure it reached Batman. Green Arrow volunteered for the mission. He infiltrated Superman's stronghold, fought through impossible odds, and managed to get his hands on the pill. But Superman found him before he could escape. The fight was one-sided. Kal-El was furious, grief-stricken, and far beyond reason. After Lois's death and Metropolis's destruction, his blows weren't meant to subdue, but to punish. Even as Superman rained down strikes, Oliver's final act was to fire an arrow carrying the pill into the shadows of the stronghold. A shot that reached Batman's son, ensuring Bruce's rebellion would have the weapon they needed. Moments later, Superman's fists ended the Archer's life. The fallout was crushing. Dinah Lance, Black Canary, was left to mourn the man she loved while fighting against the tyrant who killed him. For fans, it was another step in Superman's transformation. He wasn't sparing opponents anymore. He was eliminating them. Captain Atom. Captain Atom's death and injustice was a nuclear-scale disaster that showed how dangerous this civil war among heroes had become. Nathaniel Atom is one of the most powerful figures in the DC universe, his body containing enough raw energy to level cities. In the wrong circumstances, he's less a man and more a living warhead. And during the regime's rise, those circumstances came fast. When Superman pushed harder for control, Captain Atom became one of the few willing to stand against him directly. Their battle escalated quickly, with Atom matching Superman blow for blow thanks to the volatile energy core that fueled him. For a moment, it looked like he might be one of the rare heroes capable of holding Superman in check. But the fight turned catastrophic when Wonder Woman entered. Trying to tip the scales in Superman's favor, she struck Atom with her sword. The slash tore into his containment system, the one thing keeping his unstable power sealed. With that barrier broken, there was no stopping the chain reaction. Captain Atom began to lose control, his body glowing as the energy inside him reached critical mass. In his last moments, he fought to contain it, dragging Superman with him in a desperate attempt to take the tyrant down. But the blast was unavoidable. The explosion consumed the battlefield, wiping out everything in range with the force of a nuclear detonation. Martian Manhunter. John Johns wasn't a fringe ally. He was a founding Justice League member, someone whose powers rivaled Superman's in nearly every category. But his strength and loyalty weren't enough to save him once the regime marked him as a threat. The confrontation came when John tried to protect Black Canary, one of the loudest voices in Batman's resistance. Knowing Superman planned to silence her permanently, John stepped in, phasing her away to safety and putting himself between her and the regime. His powers, telepathy, shapeshifting, intangibility, made him a nightmare opponent. For a moment, it looked like he could stall the regime's enforcers, but Superman wasn't interested in a fight of equals. He cut straight to the most devastating option in his arsenal. Pinning John down, he unleashed his heat vision at point-blank range. Martian physiology has always had one critical weakness: fire. And Superman exploited it mercilessly. John's body ignited under the blast, his green form engulfed in flames, until there was nothing left. The death was symbolic. The Justice League's heart had always been built on trust, and John represented that unity more than anyone. Watching Superman incinerate him in cold blood shattered the illusion that this was still a league. It was a dictatorship, burning away dissent one ally at a time. Huntress. She had always been a wild card among Gotham's vigilantes, brutal in her methods, quick to step in where she saw injustice. When Superman's regime began tightening its grip, she refused to sit back, and that defiance put her directly in the path of Wonder Woman. During a confrontation with regime forces, she fought with the same ferocity that made her a fan favorite. Armed with her crossbow and unshakable will, she attacked Diana in open defiance of the New Order. Wonder Woman didn't hold back either. She wrapped Huntress in the lasso of truth, a weapon meant to compel honesty, not kill. But in the chaos of the struggle, the rope became a weapon. Diana pulled Helena toward her with crushing force, the golden cord tightening around her body. The impact snapped bones, and Huntress's neck gave way under the strain. In an instant, she was gone. What made the scene so brutal was the intent. Huntress died not at the hands of a supervillain or alien invader, but because one of Earth's greatest heroes used her own sacred weapon carelessly in battle. Readers were left stunned. Was it a tragic mistake in the heat of combat, or did it expose Diana's growing ruthlessness under Superman's influence? The fallout deepened the rift between fans of the Resistance and the regime inside the story. If even Wonder Woman's legendary tools of justice could become lethal, then no hero was above suspicion. Her death was quick, savage, and unforgettable. One more casualty that blurred the line between protectors and executioners. Alfred Pennyworth. He had always been more than a butler. To Bruce, he was a father figure, a confidant, and the one constant voice of reason when Gotham or the League pulled him into madness. Which is why his death and injustice hits with a different kind of brutality. Not cosmic, not explosive, but intimate and devastating. The killing came at the hands of Victor Zsasz, a villain Batman had faced countless times before. He was a serial killer who marked his skin for every victim. When Superman's regime escalated and chaos swept Gotham, Zsasz infiltrated Wayne Manor. Alfred, unarmed but unflinching, confronted him. What followed was one of the most heartbreaking sequences in the series. Zsasz attacked with a blade, slashing and stabbing until Alfred collapsed. The home that had always been Batman's sanctuary became the place where his last family connection was torn away. Bruce wasn't there in time. By the moment he reached Alfred, the damage was done. The fallout was immeasurable. Alfred's death left him utterly isolated. He'd already lost Dick Grayson to Damian's recklessness, and now the man who raised him was gone too. It was the kind of loss that couldn't be avenged by punching another villain. It was a scar that deepened. The divide between Batman and Superman, pushing Bruce further into his war against the regime. Guy Gardner. The Lantern Corps was never going to stay neutral once Superman's regime started spreading beyond Earth. And when the conflict finally dragged in the Green Lanterns, one of the first to fall was Guy Gardner, in a way fans never forgot. Hal Jordan had already begun sliding into dangerous territory. Under Sinestro's influence, his willpower was twisted, and the once reliable Green Lantern drifted toward authoritarian loyalty. For Guy, who had always been blunt, brash, and unafraid to call Hal out, watching his teammates slip further into darkness was too much. He confronted him directly, and paid for it with his life. The fight was ugly. Guy attacked Hal in open defiance, trying to shake him free of Sinestro's grip. For a few moments, it was classic Lantern versus Lantern, emerald constructs clashing in the void. But Hal's fury was overwhelming. He ripped through Guy's defenses, closed in, and tore his arm straight from his body. The injury was catastrophic. Lantern rings require focus and willpower, and with the trauma of that wound, Guy couldn't keep himself afloat. Hal's brutal strike sent him plummeting, his body unable to recover before impact. The brashest Lantern in the Corps was gone, killed by someone who had once been his closest ally. The fallout was devastating for the Lantern Corps. Guy had been a flawed hero, sure, but he was also a fan favorite, a fighter who never backed down. His death showed that the regime's corruption wasn't limited to Earth's governments, it had spread into the stars. And with Hal fully committed to Sinestro's path, the Green Lantern Corps fractured, leaving Superman's influence to reach further than ever before. Despero. He was never a lightweight in DC history. A conqueror with psychic powers, brute strength, and a reputation as one of the Justice League's longest-standing enemies, he had toppled worlds before. But in the Injustice timeline, his end came with shocking simplicity, a neck snap delivered by Sinestro. By the time this fight happened, Sinestro had fully inserted himself into Superman's regime, using the chaos on Earth as the perfect excuse to spread his influence. With Hal Jordan sliding into his orbit, Sinestro grew bolder, crushing opposition inside and outside the Lantern Corps. Despero, a powerhouse in his own right, eventually clashed with him. Fans expected a battle worthy of two galactic heavyweights. Instead, the encounter was brutal and short. Sinestro, fueled by his yellow power ring and ruthless confidence, engaged Despero and overpowered him. There were no drawn-out theatrics or elaborate traps. Sinestro closed the distance, used raw force, and snapped Despero's neck. The moment was unsettling because of how casual it felt. One of the Justice League's fiercest villains erased in a single move. For readers, the death was less about Despero himself and more about what it said about Sinestro. He wasn't just posturing as Superman's ally, he was enforcing the regime's dominance by taking out figures who had once terrified entire planets. It showed how far Earth's conflict had spilled into the larger DC cosmos, pulling even intergalactic warlords into Superman's orbit, only to be discarded. Mogo. Few moments in Injustice show the scale of Superman's regime better than the death of Mogo, the living planet. In the main DC universe, Mogo isn't just a Green Lantern, he's one of the Corps' greatest assets, a literal planet with a willpower strong enough to command armies. Taking him down would normally take the combined effort of entire fleets. In Injustice, it took one man, Superman. The regime's war with the Green Lantern Corps had already spiraled into open conflict. As Earth became the center of Superman's new order, the Corps mobilized to stop him. Mogo loomed as the ultimate counterbalance, a guardian whose very presence could tilt battles. For Superman, letting him remain was never an option. The encounter didn't drag into an extended war of attrition. Superman, operating with the cold certainty that had defined him since Lois's death, went straight for the planet itself. Using his nearly limitless strength, he forced Mogo out of his orbit, pushing him with relentless momentum toward the sun. The sheer visual of a Kryptonian moving a sentient world was staggering. His destruction was a message. If the Green Lantern Corps' strongest member could be erased in one catastrophic maneuver, then no force in the galaxy was safe from Superman's regime. The Lanterns, once protectors of entire sectors, suddenly looked vulnerable. Lex Luthor. For decades, Luthor had been Superman's most notorious rival, a billionaire genius who schemed to bring him down. But in the Injustice timeline, their dynamic had shifted. At first, Lex positioned himself as an ally of the regime, masking his long game of resisting Superman from within. That mask didn't last forever. When his loyalty cracked and his work against the regime came to light, Superman made an example out of him. The scene was chilling in its simplicity. Superman lifted Lex from the ground, cameras rolling, and snapped his neck without hesitation. There was no trial, no debate, no league consensus. One of Earth's most brilliant minds was erased in seconds. What made this death so impactful wasn't sympathy for Lex's morality. His record was already filled with crimes. It was the spectacle. Superman, the symbol of justice and restraint, killed his greatest nemesis live on television. That single act sent shockwaves across governments and civilians alike. If Lex Luthor, the man who once ran Metropolis and stood toe-to-toe with Superman for years, could be executed in broad daylight, then no one was safe from the regime's wrath. The political fallout was enormous. enormous. Nations that had once negotiated with the Justice League were forced into compliance. Fear cemented Superman's grip far more effectively than diplomacy ever could. For fans, it was a line in the sand, the moment where Superman didn't just silence an enemy, he silenced opposition itself. Shazam. Among all the brutal moments in Injustice, the death of Shazam stands out as the one that broke many readers. Billy Batson wasn't just another hero caught in the crossfire. He was a kid, a teenager with the magic of the gods at his command, and his murder at the hands of Superman was one of the darkest points of the entire storyline. The moment came when Superman's regime had tightened its grip on the world, pushing further into authoritarian control. Plans were underway to use devastating weapons against Atlantis, and Shazam voiced his doubts. Billy pleaded with Superman to stop, pointing out that the regime's methods were no longer about peace. They were about domination. It was a moment of courage, standing up to the man who had once been his idol. Superman's response was pure rage. Enraged at what he saw as defiance, he blasted Billy with heat vision at point-blank range. The beam cut through him before he had a chance to escape or transform, killing him instantly. The scene was shocking, not just for its violence, but for the sheer coldness. It was an execution. The fallout rippled through the regime and resistance alike. Shazam had been one of the last figures of innocence left in the League, and his death erased that light. Even Superman's closest allies were shaken. For readers, it became the defining moment where Superman could no longer be defended as a misguided hero. He had crossed into outright tyranny. Red Robin. The Bat family had already been shattered in Injustice. Nightwing was gone, Alfred was murdered, and Bruce himself was locked in a never-ending war with Superman's regime. But the death of Tim Drake, Red Robin, showed just how far the fallout stretched and how merciless the regime's battles had become. Tim's end came during one of the deadliest confrontations between the Resistance and the forces rallied behind Superman. General Zod, freed from imprisonment and fighting alongside the regime, unleashed his fury on the battlefield. In the chaos, Red Robin stood his ground, continuing the same fight Dick Grayson and Bruce had carried for years, defending Gotham's ideals against tyranny, even if it meant facing gods. Zod's response was swift and brutal. With his Kryptonian power unleashed, he cut Tim down with searing heat vision. The blast tore through Red Robin before he had a chance to counter, ending his life in seconds. It wasn't a drawn-out duel or a heroic sacrifice. It was sudden, devastating, and final, the kind of death that left allies in shock and fans reeling. For Batman, Tim's loss deepened the sense that the war was stripping away everything personal. Each fallen ally was family, and for readers, the death highlighted the imbalance of the conflict. Against beings like Zod and Superman, even the most skilled human fighters were fragile, their legacy erased in a flash of Kryptonian firepower. General Zod. His appearance in Injustice brought with it the same menace he always carried in the main DC universe. A Kryptonian warrior with military genius and raw power to match Superman, Zod was the kind of threat that could turn a battlefield upside down. But his end came at the hands of something even more terrifying. Amazo, the android built to replicate the abilities of any hero or villain it encountered. When Amazo was unleashed, it became clear the machine was less a weapon and more an extinction-level event. With the ability to copy powers instantly and wield them at amplified levels, it tore through everything in its path. Zod, full of arrogance and convinced no construct could rival him, went head-to-head with the android. The clash was violent and catastrophic, Kryptonian strength colliding with stolen might. But Amazo had no ego to cloud its decisions. It fought with efficiency, precision, and overwhelming force. The battle ended in brutal fashion. In a moment that shocked readers, Amazo seized Zod, overpowered his resistance, and ripped his head clean off. There was no hesitation, no ceremony, just raw mechanical destruction that left one of Superman's most iconic enemies as a broken corpse. The death was striking for two reasons. First, it showed how Amazo was an uncontrollable nightmare, capable of dismantling even Kryptonians. Second, it stripped Zod of the dominance he usually carried. For once, the general who had terrified Earth and Krypton alike was reduced to a gruesome cautionary tale. Fans still point to this moment as one of the most cinematic kills in Injustice. A villain built to be untouchable was decapitated in a single sequence. Dr. Fate. Kent Nelson, guided by the ancient spirit Nabu through the Helmet of Fate, had long been one of Earth's last resorts whenever magic was needed to counter cosmic threats. But when Brainiac descended on Earth, even Fate's sorcery couldn't stand against cold, calculated technology. The fight pushed Fate to his limit. With the helmet on, Nelson tapped into centuries of magical wisdom, unleashing spells capable of bending reality itself. For a brief moment, it looked like he might hold Brainiac back. But Brainiac, with his precision and relentless strategy, turned the tide by targeting the source of Fate's power directly, the helmet. In the chaos of the clash, the Helmet of Fate was shattered. The destruction severed Kent Nelson's Nelson's connection to Nabu, stripping away the near-limitless magic that made him more than human. Vulnerable for the first time in the battle, Nelson was left standing as just a man in gilded armor. Brainiac wasted no time. With his tendrils and brutal efficiency, he impaled Fate, killing him in a single strike. The scene was chilling because of its inevitability. A sorcerer who had faced gods and demons alike was undone once his ancient relic was taken away. The fallout went beyond one hero's death. Dr. Fate had always symbolized balance between order and chaos, the mystical safety net when science and strength weren't enough. Watching Brainiac dismantle him so completely was a statement. No spell, no guardian spirit, no magic could stop technology perfected for conquest. Booster Gold. As a time traveler from the 25th century, he knew more than most about where history could go wrong. And when the regime's war escalated, that foresight made his choices heavier than any ordinary hero's. His final act, giving his life to save his best friend Blue Beetle, became one of the most emotional deaths in the series. It happened during a cosmic-scale battle, where Brainiac's invasion pushed Earth's defenders to their breaking point. Jaime Reyes, the young Blue Beetle, was still new to the fight, inexperienced compared to veterans like Batman and Superman. Brainiac's forces closed in, and Jaime found himself overwhelmed. Booster knew what was coming. He had seen enough glimpses of time to recognize the crossroads. With no hesitation, he launched into action. Booster intercepted the attack, pulling Jaime clear and forcing the enemy fire onto himself. In space, where there's no second chance and no ground to recover on, the damage was fatal. His systems failed. His body broke under the pressure, and Booster Gold drifted out, sacrificing everything so Jaime could live. The moment carried more weight than just another hero falling. Booster's friendship with Blue Beetle had always been a core piece of his story, built on loyalty and humor. To see it end with a one-way trip into the void was gutting, and because of Booster's history as a time traveler, fans debated whether he always knew this was the way his path would end. Ragman. In the Injustice universe, his end was every bit as bizarre and horrifying as the character himself. It came during one of the most chaotic arcs, when cosmic magic and fifth-dimensional power collided in ways no human body could endure. The setup involved Spectre, the spirit of divine vengeance, being manipulated by Mr. Mxyzptlk, a trickster with reality-bending abilities that go far beyond any sorcery. Ragman, merged with Spectre's presence, was caught in the middle of their distorted war. His rags, usually a shield and weapon, couldn't protect him from what was about to unfold. Mxyzptlk turned the fight into a nightmare. With his warped, cartoonish control over reality, he literally tore Ragman apart. Not metaphorically, not in some symbolic sense. Panel by panel, his body was shredded into pieces. Limbs, fabric, and flesh were ripped away like they were nothing more than scraps. The grotesque image of a hero unraveling in mid-battle cemented the scene as one of Injustice's most graphic kills. For readers, the moment hit harder because Ragman was one of those fringe, mystical figures who normally stood outside the main spotlight. His brutal end showed that in this universe, nobody was safe, not even the oddball street-level mystics. Weather Wizard. Mark Martin, armed with his weather wand, had long been a thorn in the Flash's side, summoning storms, lightning, and blizzards at will. In the chaos of the Injustice world, he ended up crossing paths with someone far more dangerous than a speedster, Bizarro. Bizarro, the unstable clone of Superman, was a walking disaster. His strength rivaled Kal-El's, but his mind was fractured, his morality skewed, and his sense of restraint non-existent. When Weather Wizard stood against him, trying to wield his control over the elements, it was like bringing a toy against a natural disaster. The encounter ended almost instantly. Bizarro unleashed a blast of heat vision, a power that mirrored Superman's but carried none of his discipline. The beam struck Weather Wizard full force. In the panels, his body is shown disintegrating under the heat, reduced to little more than a charred skeleton in seconds. No time to regroup, no chance to counter, just a villain erased in the blink of an eye. The brutality of the scene was matched by its irony. A man who spent his life mastering the weather, calling down lightning and firestorms, was burned away by a single burst of alien heat. Fans were left unsettled at how casually Bizarro ended him. King Shark. Truth be told, King Shark, the hulking humanoid with jaws that could crush steel, was never easy prey. His sheer size and savagery made him a constant threat, even to metahumans who had seen it all. But against Barry Allen, the fastest man alive, brute force didn't matter. In a moment that blended dark comedy with shocking violence, Flash weaponized the most mundane object imaginable, a broom. The sequence played out with the speed and precision only a speedster could manage. Flash grabbed the broom, accelerated to supersonic velocity, and launched it like a javelin. The force force behind the throw was enough to turn a cleaning tool into a lethal weapon. The broomstick pierced through King Shark's face, the impact killing him instantly. Readers were stunned by the sheer absurdity. In a universe where entire cities were obliterated and heroes fought gods, one of DC's most fearsome animalistic villains was taken out by household equipment. It was brutal, it was graphic, and it was unforgettable for how surreal it felt. For the larger story, King Shark's death was more of a footnote, but in terms of shock value, it stood alongside the most infamous deaths in the series. And that's it. Now to you, if you were living in the Injustice universe, would you side with Superman's regime to survive under his rule, or risk everything with Batman's resistance, knowing how many allies were slaughtered along the way? Comment down below as you leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.